just going to touch on these three pieces: general principles, greenhouses. I thought I'd just throw a couple slides in regarding mushrooms. It's something I've recently looked into, and I think it's interesting. And then somewhere, I think polycarbonate, it might be before mushrooms. In any event, I want to talk about polycarbonate options, what we could work together on, and how we could source materials for greenhouses at fairly low prices comparatively. So let's talk about the principles really quick. And I'm going to use a little bit of math, just a few slides here, just to explain a few things. I don't want to bore anybody. But when you think of light, just to give my background really quick. So I'm registered in mechanical engineering and in fire protection engineering. Those are the two fundamental engineering disciplines for heat transfer. So that's kind of the background I'm coming from in describing this. So when you look at the sun is at a specific temperature. It's about 5,800 Kelvin. And the term Kelvin, that's basically Celsius plus 273. It's an absolute temperature term. About 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit, 5,800 Kelvin, something along those lines. And if you look at this graph, I really love this graph. It's really interesting because it just shows how perfectly human biology matches our solar system. This visible spectrum, this is basically, it's in units of energy density, but it shows what we see. And it shows that in comparison to the overall range of, let me change my pointer, the overall range of light spectral distribution coming from the sun. This represents 37% of the overall energy emitted from the sun. It's perfectly, this narrow band, it's perfectly attenuated to our eyes and life on Earth. And the span, it's between 380 nanometers and 740 nanometers. And what's interesting is that plants have a photosynthesis active region that's closely approximated by our visual range. It's a little tighter. The PAR is between 400 and 700. So it's a little bit tighter than what we see. What I want to emphasize in understanding how greenhouses work is comprehend that all matter emits energy, but it emits it at different spectra. So if we lived around a red dwarf would be like 2,000 to 3,000 Kelvin. The light we would see from that sun, that red dwarf sun, it would be incredibly dim in comparison with our sun. And let me see here. For some reason, I can't forward. Why? I'll just use the return. Okay. So here's another graph. It's different units. But if you look, the visible, so the light coming from the sun is this black line at the top. And the light that the Earth emits, it's down in this range here. And what you'll notice is, because this is visible range, and this is red here, that's at the lower end of our visible range, everything that the Earth emits predominantly is infrared. So how a greenhouse works, how your glazing works, your glass or your polyethylene or your polycarbonate, it'll have the higher frequencies come into the glazing. It'll warm up the matter in the greenhouse. And that matter being at a lower temperature, like the 300 Kelvin range versus 5,800 Kelvin for sun, that lower energy will emit a different spectra, the infrared range, and that'll bounce off your glazing, and that's how a greenhouse warms up. The other thing I wanted to briefly talk about, just two more slides here on math, just forgive me, but it's to understand heat transfer. Where your ranch is located, you're in a location that's fairly dry. If you consider air, the relative humidity of your atmosphere, that's an insulating value. It has an insulating characteristic, such as a cloudy day in Portland. You could feel a difference when there's clouds out. If it's at night, something like that, it feels warmer. The air temperature might be the same, but because there's clouds there, those clouds keep the energy from being sucked out of us. And that's based on a radiation, or the radiation transport equation. This first equation is just in very simplistic terms. your energy Q, your radiative energy, is proportional to the fourth power of your emitting energy minus the fourth power of the incident target energy, or whatever's sucking the energy out of you. So if I'm at my elevation, about a mile, very dry skies, and the atmosphere is my incident target for my energy, my body energy, the atmosphere is like at absolute zero. So it's sucking all this energy out of me at this fourth power. It's this huge number if you think about it. And I want to contrast that with convective energy, because I'll use this equation briefly, but understand that the relationship for convective energy is just your temperature, your difference in temperature. It's linear. It's not raised to the fourth power. So the question is, why greenhouses? This is one of the two domes that I've built on my property. I have a 32-acre parcel about 2 miles from my house that I just go and play at. I do little experiments and just kind of explore different ideas. So my primary concern is that I believe, just like you, I think we all can agree that there are changes coming that are going to impact food stability, and that food independence, I think, is going to be important for us to maintain general independence and support of our families. Um, and I think at some point we're going to come to a situation where it's going to be challenging for us to maintain our integrity and also be able to maintain economic viability. So it's really important that we have some kind of independence, and food being the primary one. Now, I'm only bringing this up not to be political. I just want to be aware of it. I'm going to go back really quick to this graph here, just so we can understand this. And it plays into a broader discussion. So I want to understand it. This shows the principle of global warming, and I want to explain why, because this is going to be a powerful political wedge point for us. The light coming in from the sun up here, high frequency. The light leaving the earth, low frequency. Now, it just so happens that nitrogen and oxygen represent 99% of our atmosphere, and they are thermally invisible to infrared light. So the light below what we can see. We can't see infrared light. We can feel it, but we can't see it. Now, it just so happens that carbon and hydrogen attenuate very well with infrared light spectrums. And the argument is, we went from 280 parts per million about 150 years ago to 430 parts per million today. So that's an increase of over 50% of the primary molecule in our atmosphere that's responsible for attenuating with that energy that the Earth emits. So that's the foundational argument for climate change, carbon emissions, how that affects things. And agriculture represents about a quarter of the overall carbon emissions. It will be targeted. That's what happened in Sri Lanka, leading to the nation's bankruptcy. That's what happened or is happening in the Netherlands right now. It's all targeting agriculture because of the carbon emissions. So that's going to be another factor that plays heavily into our ability to have sustainable agriculture, to be able to produce food for ourselves. And there's several other things we could discuss. I think it was clear from COVID-19, the results of transportation and supply chain interruptions. It affected the quality of our food. We're still seeing the ramifications from that in terms of egg prices, meat prices, et cetera. And we're going to see significantly greater influence from the war in Ukraine relative to grains that will be coming. So let's talk about greenhouse types. I'm not going to go through the Chinese style passive solar Walipini, but I will target the shed style dome and high tunnel. And I'll do that just because they're fairly generic. It's easy to understand those things, and we're limited on time. This is my first greenhouse. This was, back in 2017, 2016, it really impressed upon me that you have to understand, have to have some greenhouse, some kind of sustainable process for, food development. So I watched all the YouTube videos out there and read all the websites. So I built this interesting greenhouse that I could test these ideas on and also test glazing. And so I started off on the roof testing polyethylene. And I discovered polyethylene is bad. I mean, it just doesn't do anything in my climate because I have a very dry atmosphere. And once again, that T to the fourth influence sucks the energy away because of my dry atmosphere and my elevation. So I tried polyethylene. It got shredded in the wind. I have very high wind here. I tried glass. I had issues with cracks on that. I tried clear polyvinyl chloride. It just shredded in the wind. The stuff I bought from Home Depot, worthless. I tried the polycarbonate from Home Depot. It did not do very well either. The single layer, no insulation. So I finally tried the 4-layer polycarbonate, and it worked great. It just was fabulous. It was durable. It didn't crack. It was easy to install. There just were no downsides except the crazy high cost. I couldn't afford it. So I found a solution. I reached out to a company in China, and what would it take for me to buy some polycarbonate? And I actually had to buy a whole cargo container. It was crazy scary because putting out that kind of money sight unseen, not knowing if this guy's going to rip you off, it was scary. But I went ahead and did that, took that leap of faith, and was very well pleased when I got my 20-foot cargo container. And then I started building some greenhouses with that and started selling some polycarbonate, etc. I wanted to point out something I learned from this interesting greenhouse. Two things. You could have all the neat ideas on the planet. So I have a rocket stove in here. I'm recessed. I had an insulated north side. All the ideas that people do. And what was impressed upon me is those things are so negligible in terms of providing the energy for a greenhouse in comparison with glazing and structure, your architectural design. That those two items, your architectural design and your glazing, are predominant. You have to get that right before adding any of the other peripheral stuff like ground loops and water containers and stuff like that. You have to get your design right. The other thing I thought was interesting, and I don't really understand why people don't do it, is by using glazing on a shed for like an animal shed. I ended up turning this into my goat and chicken shed, is you don't have to thaw your water out because the sun's energy, you can capture that, and your livestock can just drink their water without having to worry about breaking ice. So it's a clean and a smart solution. And the reality is the polycarbonate, it's as expensive as, or cheap, I guess, as your standard corrugated metal. So it's just a smart solution if you're building a shed for animals. Why not use polycarbonate glazing that you actually bring energy and visible light in? You keep it warm. I mean, it's just, I don't see a downside. I don't know why people don't make, like shops out of it. It's just a smart solution. This is another shed style. I've built several shed styles for people. This is one example. This just shows a 1.5 to 12 pitch roof. The glazing, it's a smooth surface. I think it's not the IBC, ASC 710. That's the structural engineering, I guess, code, I guess you call that. And it defines something called a smooth surface. But to invoke that, you have to have a heated environment. And what I found on greenhouses, even with this crazy narrow 1.5 to 12 pitch roof, it slides right off because the greenhouse, it warms up enough that it heats the roof, and polycarbonate is smooth enough that it slides right off. You don't have to worry about significant accumulations of snow unless in really crazy extreme situations. Here's kind of a weird one I built. My wife asked me for a gazebo. I'm too practical to make a gazebo, so I made a gazebo greenhouse. She didn't appreciate it, but she actually loves it now. It's a great greenhouse. It's just a 5-sided greenhouse. So, there's a lot of different stuff you can make. So this is a dome. This is a 39-foot diameter dome. And I tried a lot of neat things in this that you can't see. I have one other photograph of this I'll talk about maybe, but so what I did here is I considered, what about water? So I made a recycling system here by using discarded silage tarps. I excavated it out, laid these plastic silage tarps down and pointed them toward the middle, and then laid gravel over the top of that, and then built grow beds on top of that. I used recycled carpet to filter water so that it would go into sewer lines. I could capture all my water. That way I could very efficiently, make sure my water isn't wasted. But this, I insulated the north side with polyisocyanurate. And what I want to point out with this, more math, is if all things are the same, if your relative humidity, your temperature, your wind velocity, if you consider all that is the same, and you look at this convective relationship, this is Newton's law of cooling, your H sub K value is going to be your heat transfer coefficient. And you can lump both the convective and radiative portions into that H sub K value. And what that tells me, looking at this, if everything else is a constant, is area becomes your independent variable. So if I'm trying to optimize greenhouse production and I want to minimize my heat losses, Q is heat loss, I try to minimize this ratio, glazing area, so that's the area of your polycarbonate, divided by your growing area.
Max got his mission call. Did you see that?
No.
Somebody's sharing it.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes. Hey, yeah, it's muted.
I hope you're following me. I apologize if I'm talking too fast. I wanted to get through a few things and then we'll talk about some stuff. Do you have any questions at this point we could resolve? Okay, then I will continue. This is the other factor in designing your optimal greenhouse. It's glazing area, so your polycarbonate, so that's the area here. That's the area that's affected by the temperature differential. So the differential being defined as the temperature outside your greenhouse minus the temperature inside your greenhouse. So your heat losses equal this your coefficient. That's a part of your system. Okay, it's a fixed part of your system times your area of your glazing times your difference in temperature between inside and outside. What that shows me is if I reduce my area of glazing, I'm going to reduce my overall heat losses. So that's where structural architectural optimization comes into play. So if you look at a dome, the volume of a sphere is 4 pi r squared. So a half of a sphere is 2 pi r squared. Your growing area is the floor surface, pi r squared. So if I divide the two, 2 pi r squared divided by pi r squared is 2. So that's my ratio. So let's use that as a benchmark as we continue, just to think about a few things. So let's talk about high tunnels really quick. This is the other factor I mentioned, glazing. This woman was starting kind of a Bountiful Baskets program. It was kind of neat. She had a bunch of stuff growing in here. About a year ago, a little less than a year ago, April, the wind just stripped her high tunnel, completely wiped it out. So she had one layer of polyethylene gone, just like that, really quick. Similar, here's another, this is next to her, a field away, just across some farmer's field. This gentleman had 2 greenhouses, high tunnels, likewise stripped away. Here is a greenhouse at a high school. Once again, polyethylene. You can see the wind damage, just stripped. My daughter and I took this photograph last weekend. So that made me think, look, I get 0 radiative protection from polyethylene. I cannot withstand the wind with polyethylene. I mean, it lasts great in most situations, but sooner or later, you're going to have that crazy 70 mile an hour windstorm in April, and all your hard work will be gone, not just in terms of your greenhouse, but all the things you're growing in it. And it just doesn't seem like a very safe place to be. That's why I wanted to create polycarbonate greenhouses. So they didn't offer any polycarbonate glazed greenhouses that were reasonably priced. There just were no high tunnel ones. So this is a greenhouse I designed. This is my latest greenhouse. I actually constructed this end of July. I planted beginning of August. I designed this and then had a factory in China manufacture it. And the comparable out of Conley's, they're a fairly large manufacturer in California. Most people buy Conley or Nexus greenhouses in the United States. Their comparable was about $28 a square foot. Um, we have somebody in Arco that bought a Conley's 2,000 square foot. It was $80,000 by the time, she built, had it delivered, bought it. And that was 2-layer glazing, by the way. This is all 4-layer glazing. And I'll discuss that, what that means. But so we had to come up with a way that's inexpensive. So this kit was nice. I want to point out, let's use that mathematical model again. So once again, glazing and architecture are important. But if you look at a high tunnel like this one, and let's look at that ratio. Glazing area over growing area. I mentioned before that the dome was 2, 2 pi r squared divided by pi r squared, 2 is that ratio. For a high tunnel, it's a little bit different because you have to take in consideration your end walls. But what that tells is L, the bigger L is, or in other words, the length, the bigger your length is, the longer your greenhouse is. If your width is the same, W is the width. The longer your greenhouse is, the more efficient it becomes. Just by this equation. So what that tells me is if you had a really short and wide greenhouse, you're not as efficient as if you had a really long greenhouse. So just something to keep in mind. This is one of those kits from last year. This gentleman purchased this and installed it. Here's another one. This person actually built a foundation, a 4-foot foundation wall, and then installed the kit on top of it. They did exceptional jobs. This guy was a construction pro, just beautiful. It was square, it was straight. The ridge line was beautiful. And it kind of embarrassed me because I did not take that much time when I built mine. The problem I had with this kit is a lot of people didn't have construction experience, and then I'd have to go build it for them. Well, not build it for them, help them. And it really was kind of annoying when I had to drive, an hour and a half away to do that, because that wasn't anticipated. When I sold these, I said, hey, there's a lot of construction work involved. Make sure your foundation's square, straight, whatever. But they installed them and they just ended up not doing a very good job. So I decided I didn't want to go with this kit anymore. The other thing I didn't like, this is a standard design. I didn't like, I think we could do a better job with more steel. So this is the first high tunnel I built on my property. I have 3. This is a 30, how big is it? 20, this is a 2,500 square foot one. I have a 3,100 square foot one and a 4,300 square foot one. But this is the kit I'm going to do this summer. And I verified in snowstorms, it behaves very well. I have a YouTube video on that behavior. It sheds snow very well. And so these have a lot more steel in them. I'll be selling them for $11 a square foot. It's variable because your end walls are going to be a fixed cost. So for the ones that are 56, 55 feet long or so, it'll be about 11 a square foot. But there's twice as much steel. So this is 2 years ago. My wife was in here. This shows mid-season and after we started growing in it. So it's a very practical greenhouse. It's 12 feet high. And the thing is, because it's on purlins, so if you look here, these are square tubes, 14 gauge galvanized tubing on 2 to 2.5 foot centers. And I think there's 4 foot centers at the bottom. Because of that, it's easy to get your polycarbonate on in comparison with the kit. This kit, you had to be kind of square because the butt joints, they rode on the hoops. Anyway, the point is you had to be square. Whereas if you do this approach, you don't have to be square. It can go up pretty fast and you can be kind of sloppy in construction. So it's just generally easier to construct. So just one hint, one of my goals here is to minimize carbon emissions, maximize production, just to be very minimalistic. And one thing I did here is I oversized all my water delivery lines. So I use a solar powered pump. And then I have free silage tarps on the bottom that I got from the dairy and from the cooperative. So that cuts all the weeds down. I didn't have to pay anything for that. So it's just a smart solution. Helps protect the ground, retains water, and keeps the weeds from spreading. So it's a good solution to use the silage tarps, and they usually end up in the landfill. So it's a win-win for everybody. Just wanted to talk about how to do construction. So this is that kit. This is, we built that a couple years ago. As you can see, the glazing, this is 8mm 4-layer glazing. And these are 7-foot wide, well, 6.9-foot wide panels. I'll explain how the nominal at 7 feet works shortly, but these are 19-foot long panels. So they fit right on your purlins, these horizontal members, and you screw them in with self-tapping screws. And then you put butt joints. I use 2-part butt joints. That's this stuff. Not a very good photo. If you're looking around on the internet, a lot of places will show you H-channel. That's a 1-piece butt joint. I don't like H-channel at all. I highly recommend you do not buy or use H-channel butt joints. It just is a 1-piece. You fit them in. It looks like an H profile. In fact, I'll show it to you. I have it on that dome. Let's go back and take a look at that dome really quick. So this is H-channel. Can't really see it up close, but the point is, it's really crazy hard to put in. And the two-part butt joint, it's just so much easier. Now it's expensive. It's $42 for a 19-foot stick versus I think it's 15 for the H channel, but it's 1,000 times worth it. I'm very happy I found this stuff and use it. This is a wider greenhouse. The reason this is 38.5 feet wide. Now I'm showing this to you because I built 3 different styles of high tunnels. And I did that to test ideas. So I made this a lot wider and a lot higher. It's 18 feet high. And one thing I noticed that was really interesting is the temperature gradient is substantially moderated by the height of the greenhouse. So the 12-foot tall greenhouse, it's a lot hotter than this 18-foot one because the temperature can stratify better. So what I'm saying by that is there's a lot of factors involved. I don't know if you're familiar with the psychrometric charts. It's something that a mechanical engineer uses to estimate water content and air. But what you can do at maybe dry bulb and wet bulb temperatures, those might be other terms some of you might be familiar with. But when you have wet air or high relative humidity, it has enormous amounts of potential energy. So the bigger your volume is, and keep in mind that I don't want to use, bore you with math, but if you recall that the formula for your sphere, for the volume of the sphere is 4/3 pi r cubed. But the surface area of a sphere is 4 pi r squared. So that means the larger you get, you have it's not a linear relationship. It's basically a power function. It's an exponential function. The larger you get, you have significantly more air, which means because you have that water content, significantly more moisture. And that's an important factor here. Because if you have an itty bitty greenhouse, you have low volume and the energy is just sucked out of it. When you have a big volume, that water retains, it's like a thermal battery. Water is a thermal battery, whether it's in liquid form or air form. And to put this into perspective, I believe the heat of the saturation energy, the amount of energy it takes to transfer water to liquid, it's 944 BTU. And let me put that into contrast. 1 pound of water raised from like 200 degrees Fahrenheit to 201 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 1 BTU. But the amount of energy for 1 pound of water to transition from water to steam is 944 BTU. So it's this phase change. It's this huge phase energy. So what happens is the water will, the steam, the vapor in your air it'll condense on your glazing, and then that will freeze. Now, the reason I bring that up is that protects your plants. that energy is being sucked out of the air, not your plants. So even though you could have 32-degree temperature in a greenhouse, you still are not necessarily going to freeze if you have large volumes. So it's kind of an interesting concept that's worth discussing. The other thing I wanted to point out is if you want a cheap way to make your horizontal trussing, I used 3/16" cables here. And it's much cheaper than your tubes. I use 14 gauge. That is it's 1.25-inch nominal. That's 1 9/16 inch exterior diameter. Normally, when you're looking at specs for greenhouses, they'll give you the exterior diameter. So that's 1 9/16 there. But I would recommend to minimize your loads, the tensile member is your horizontal member. Use a cable there and it'll strengthen your greenhouse significantly. Very inexpensively too. The other thing I wanted to do is mention vents. You absolutely have to have your vents. There's an aspect ratio that's recommended. It's 2-to-1. The kits I sold last year were 8 meter by 16 meter. It was intentionally done that way because then you only need gable vents. So if your length is twice the width or less, you can just get away with gable vents rather than having vents all over your roof. At least that's my observation, and that seems to be written on the literature. If you're going to be building them, what you'd end up doing is making vents out of galvanized steel. Any kits that I produce, I do not make the vents. So the end user makes the vents. They'll chop the steel up and make the vents, put them where they want. Here's just a couple examples. This is interesting. This is an automatic opener. You can buy these on Amazon for $30, $35 each. And you can set them, based on the depth you screw them in, you can set them to like 70 degrees. They will start opening. And how they work is they have beeswax in them. And as that beeswax warms up, it expands. So that allows you to have automatic vents without having to go in and manually open them or close them. You can automate that whole process fairly inexpensively. So here's some different, different stuff. Now, mainly what we're going to talk about, I'll show you some pictures of the panels, but you need to consider your screws. I ran out of screws actually on that 4,300 square foot greenhouse. So I had to go to Tacoma Screw. I was paying, I think, 13 cents a piece. I actually sell these for 8 cents a piece. But you can buy them. I use them between 1/2 inch to 2 inches long, depending on what I'm doing. If you're using steel, these are self-tapping screws. I have some clear corrugated. This is a 2-layer corrugated. Corrugated is really easy to install. It has good resistance to bending, but it can handle a 12-foot radius. That's what it's rated for. But it has an air gap. Now, if you buy this stuff at Home Depot, there's no air gap. It's just a solid. And as I stated before, in a solid, there is 0 protection from radiative heat transfer. You have to have an air gap in your glazing. Whether it's 2 layers of polyethylene, that's how a lot of people do it. They use a blower and expand that interstitial space between the 2 polyethylene layers. Or if you can use polycarbonate, using just flat, solid polycarbonate, it does you nothing in terms of protecting your crops. You have to have 2 layers. So if you buy the Home Depot stuff, it's 1 layer. For the same price, I sell the 2-layer. You get twice the polycarbonate for the same exact price, but it has an insulation value. So it's actually a pretty good product. The one I'll show you a picture of it, but the one stuff you can get it in all sorts of colors. I just sell the clear stuff, but if I knew people wanted some colored stuff, I'd get it. This is some funky stuff. This is called a 5-layer material. It's not really used for greenhouses very often. I see people, there's a person in Logan that's selling some 5 and 7-layer. This is another topic you need to be aware of. 70%, that's a magic number. When you're designing your greenhouse, you have to consider your glazing, not just from heat retention, but also the absorptivity or the amount of, transmissibility, the amount of energy that it can transmit. If if you go to Olson's is in Salem, which is by Provo. They're the largest greenhouse in the state of Utah. And they exclusively use on their greenhouses, I think actually size wise, they're about 3.1 million, but that includes their Santaquin site, Provo site, and they have a Colorado site. But they use almost exclusively 2-layer 6 millimeter or 8 millimeter polycarbonate. They would never use this. The reason they do that is because the transmissibility is between 76 and 78%. So the light from the sun, you get about 70, let's say 77% coming through that glazing. If you're using glass, like in the Netherlands, they'll use glass that's 90%. Now, the reason Netherlands use glass, they'll use a single pane of glass, is because they have a very moderate temperature there. And they're also low on elevation and a lot of humidity, relative humidity. So they need the higher transmissibility. And they also can get away without having 2 layers because they don't lose so much to the radiate effect. Where we're at, we don't need a 90% transmissibility because it's a lot sunnier here. The intensity of the sun is a lot higher. So you're not going to really find any commercial grower that's, I should say most of them are going to use the 2-layer polycarbonate. Now I deal with 4-layer. Why do I use 4-layer polycarbonate on my greenhouses? Well, I get a longer growing season, but I don't grow as fast. I have a 71% transmissibility. Now, if I wanted to grow fast, I'd use the 2-layer, but the problem is I'd have a shorter growing season and then I'd have to supplement with heat. Olson's in Salem, they have about $150,000 a year natural gas bill. Same thing up at Pinea in Ogden, about the same thing. Now, I will mention Pinea does use polyethylene. They for some of their greenhouses. They also have to replace it every 4 years. They do not do that because of wind damage. They don't have a lot of wind there. They do that because polyethylene clouds. And the cloudy nature of polyethylene then affects transmissibility, which drops you below that magic number of 70%. When you drop below 70%, you just have it's a tougher time to grow. You don't grow as fast. And that's, I'm bringing this up because the 5 on the 7-layer, it has a sub 70% transmissibility. It has great thermal properties, but you're not going to grow as fast. And my observation is the 4-layer is kind of optimal for the prepper, the person that wants to be carbon neutral, negative, that wants to be off grid, that wants to have minimal, carbon or have to, why do I want to have to start a fire in there, wood burning stove. So that's why I went with 4-layer. I think in the future, I'd like a mix. I'd like to try out some 2-layer greenhouses, but I haven't done that yet. But I carry both 2-layer and 4-layer, 8 millimeter, and I have some other sizes as well. So that just shows this piece here. This is a 16 millimeter, but it shows that I have there's this. You can use, what do you call it? This cloudy. It diffuses the light better. No commercial growers use it. And this shows some J channel for trim, and also it's a different way of attaching it. I've never used this variety, but I know it's available. Okay, when you're looking at YouTube channels, one thing you'll notice, if you look at Bigelow Brook Farms, they have a popular YouTube channel for domes. They just use standard tin roofing screws into wood through their polycarbonate. That voids the warranty. What happens is you have localized stress that results in premature yellowing and cracking, and it would void the 10-year warranty. You have to use wide screws. And I have 2 varieties. This is a 1.5 inch diameter. I mainly sell the 1.2 inch. It's just more convenient. But you have to use these. If you're going into wood, you'd use just standard tin metal roofing screws. If you're going into steel, like galvanized steel frames, you'd use those screws I showed you before. This is your J channel. So if you look behind on this picture, there's open channels in your polycarbonate. You have to protect those. Otherwise, you'll have condensation and dust buildup over time. So you can use like HVAC aluminum tape. This H channel, this aluminum channel is another mechanism to do that. It's much more permanent, looks more professional. I also carry polycarbonate J channel, but do not use it. It's a nightmare to use J channel polycarbonate. It's a pain to use. Some people out there, I'm sure, use it, but I cannot figure out how to successfully use it. I've actually been giving that stuff away just because I don't want to deal with it. So here's something else. This is the difference between a 2-layer. So down here, this is what just about every commercial grower, 80% of growers are going to use the 2-layer polycarbonate. This is the 4-layer. It gives you 3 air pockets. And as I recall, I'm just ballparking. It's like, man, I'm thinking it's around a 56% increase in R value. It's not like 3 times the R value, but you get a noticeable difference. These here are some of the panels I carry. These particular, I have 2 different sizes. I have the international standard size. It's about 6.5 feet by 19.5 feet. This one here is, I think, 6.9 feet by 19 feet. There's reasons you'd use different sizes. Depends on, if you're a DIY kind of person, you're trying to, build your own frame, that kind of thing. So there's factors there. Goats. Okay, part of my strategy was to let goats clean up the mess, and they like to eat everything. I'm kind of bummed about this. They ate a lot of my greenhouse. Over here, this is lessons learned. I use black plastic in the rest of my greenhouses, but I wanted to do an experiment. I wanted to find out what would happen if I used white plastic. And for one reason or another, I didn't think this through. The white plastic I used was white on both sides, so it let light through. And that resulted in all the grass and stuff growing quite nicely underneath it, so it didn't do any good. So caution, you might keep in mind, don't use that kind of white plastic if you're going to do it. Okay, so on the right here, these are 46-inch by 19-foot long corrugated 2-layer polycarbonate panels. $95 each on a per square footage basis. It's the same price as your single layer Home Depot. It's actually a good product. The R value is not nearly as good as your flat multi-layer stuff. I wanted to show you. So if you guys are interested, I'm happy to work with you and use my contacts, my brokers, my cargo brokers, as well as my contacts in China. So I have a couple contacts. One's for steel and accessories, and one's for polycarbonate. So this is the load I just ordered for some greenhouse kits. They're shipping that this week. So they sent me a picture of just let me see what I have to confirm. But there's no reason why you couldn't order it yourself. I could give you a bill of materials. I could spec things out. I could help you. I take a small commission for my time and my liability, but it'd be minor. But you could have this shipped right to OSR, the ranch, and whereas I'm charging $11 a square foot, and my margins are like 35% or so. You could have this shipped right to your ranch, and then your cost per square footage for a really solid quality greenhouse would be like $7 a square foot. You just can't touch that. I mean, that's just an unbelievable price. You just cannot touch that price anywhere. So I mean, you'd have to cough up probably 35, 40 grand for a full cargo container. That's about what it's costing. But you'd make, I'd have to calculate off my top of my head, but that'd give you like 7 greenhouses. So I mean, it's that are like 1,500 square feet, something like that. I don't remember the exact number, but you get the gist. Okay. I want to emphasize something that I learned the hard way. Man, this is I built this 3 years ago. I built this in 2020, and I treated the wood. I mean, I painted this with an oil-based wood. Look at that. What happens is you have so much humidity in your greenhouse. And once again, recall what I said before about that relative humidity. What happens is when that relative humidity in the air, the air cools, it condenses on your glazing, and then it freezes overnight. And then what happens when the sun hits your glazing, it melts. And guess where it runs onto? It runs onto your wood. So every day, every morning, this wood would get saturated by water. Now, the irony is I had tons of pressure treated wood I could have used. I figured I'd be good enough with a nice, coat of paint. No, bad move. I should not never have done that. Ever, ever, ever should I have done that. The amount of labor that's going to go in for me to pressure what I'm going to do. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'll tell you straight up. I already bought the Cabot, premium Cabot, 8-year waterproofer. I'm going to go into the pressure washer. I'm going to blast all the paint off, and I'm just going to spray it everywhere. I'm not going to mess with the brush or anything. It's going to get the glazing, but look, I don't have the time to mess with it. If I just would have been smart up front and used pressure treated wood, it wouldn't be a problem. If I would have been smarter and used galvanized steel, I would have never, ever had a problem in my whole life. I will never build a greenhouse out of wood for myself again. It's just a complete waste. It's really kind of disappointing. I'm going to talk really quick. I just have 2 slides. I just want to show the SHIIT. I want to be clear. That's what it says on the right side. It's not slang. That's shiitake. The other thing I've been thinking about is greenhouses. How can you really optimally grow things? Utilize your square footage. I can take my greenhouse waste. I've been feeding it to my goats, and then I blend that goat manure into my soil. It's this perfect balance. It's a smart solution because I can genuinely be carbon negative. I pointed out why that's going to be, it may not be important now, but it's going to be. A holistic approach to independent, sustainable agriculture is going to be important. But let's think about this. What if I took that waste and then I sterilized it, and then I could grow like mushrooms with it? And I could grow those mushrooms at the base of my tomato plants. They don't need light. It's this perfect holistic solution. And even adding to that, the mushrooms actually draw nutrients from the ground and help plants grow. So it's this perfect win-win situation. So in December, I built this mushroom. This was an old coal room in my house. I have a 100-year-old house. Actually, I bought an old church. It was a church house built by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 1920. And I bought that about 10 years ago, about 10,000 square feet. So I have several rooms I never really even used. This was the old coal room. It was put into this mushroom so I could do experiments. And then I took an Idaho National Lab. I purchased this tank that I built this glove box with because you need very sterile conditions for mushroom growth. But, I've started growing mushrooms here in bags. But what I wanted to get at is you can bring those bags or even inoculated logs into greenhouses, and you can very effectively grow mushrooms. It's just this kind of interesting concept. So let's see. Yeah, I guess that's about it. The Gothic high tunnel comes up to a peak. And what that does, it really doesn't overly impact your square footage, but it allows you to easily shed snow. Now I had a monstrous snowstorm this day. This little, what you see up there, 6 inches, that's nothing. I think I got dumped on 16 inches that day. But what happened is over time, you'd lose the snow and then it would start to accumulate. You lose the snow. It went on these cycles. So the Gothic style sheds snow very well. It's fairly easy. It's a little bit harder to build than the standard high tunnel because you have to cap the top, but I have some trim for that. It's actually not hard with the trim. But the profile, the definition, there's several different definitions. I could actually, let's see it. I could say this is a Gothic high tunnel. It's more of a gable style. A gable would be like a house, but I think most people would call that as a Gothic style, the kit I had last year. But this is more of an authentic curved Gothic style. So hope that helps. While I have this presentation, we can jump to slides if you tell me what slide you want. Did anybody else have a question that we should address
Yes.
while the slide shows up?
Coralie had a question. Oh, maybe Robert answered it about what you use to insulate.
Yeah, I mean, I was just trying to picture because you've been talking about the like 3-layer, 4-layer, 2-layer polycarbonate. When you say insulate the north side, I was trying to picture what else are you talking about besides the let's say 4-layer polycarbonate, what are you suggesting to insulate in addition to that?
Absolutely, absolutely. So if you look at the dome, now these are flat surfaces. These aren't curved. So it was very easy to insulate that. I insulated that with 3 inches of polyisocyanurate insulation. Now the reason I used polyiso was because it has an R6 per inch. The glazing itself has an effective R value of 2.2. Now that is both convective and radiative. I want to be clear. When you look at normally the greenhouse glazing, when you look online, the number you see is the combination of convective and radiative. It's kind of deceptive. I'm more of a purist in terms of physics. If you look at a house insulation, the fiberglass you use, or even the foam insulation, that is strictly radiative. So what I'm saying, and normally if you're using like a single layer of polyethylene, it's purely convective. There is no radiative insulation whatsoever. It usually is about 0.86 for an effective R value. Okay. So what I'm saying by insulating the north side, I'm saying build a greenhouse with polycarbonate glazing. The reason to do that is, well, no matter what exterior finish you use, whether it's metal or vinyl siding or whatever, there's a cost attached to it. And the reality is, it's just so much easier to put a polycarbonate. It might be more expensive than some stuff, but the reality is, the stuff I'm selling it for the same price as your corrugated steel. So why not just use polycarbonate? It looks better. It's easier to install. It provides R value. So just do that. And then because of the curved surface, polyiso is fairly rigid. But if you get unfaced, normally there's a felt that goes on your polyiso. If you get like 1 inch or ½ inch polyiso that's unfaced, it'll bend to match the curvature of my kits. The other thing you could do is use polystyrene. Polystyrene is a very poor insulator. I really can't remember off the top of my head what it is per inch, but it's maybe half of what polyiso is. Blue boards, I think blue boards are like an R5 per inch. So there's different options you have, but what I'm recommending here is after you've done your greenhouse, you orient it east to west, just go ahead and glue in or otherwise mechanically fasten rigid insulation to your north side. And what I did I think shucks, let me see, I'll go through this. I showed you that picture of my goat attack when I left the goats in there. Yeah. So the other thing I did, it used to be beautiful. This looks pretty nasty, but I used a fiber reinforced glue on my polyiso boards, and then I fastened the Sam's Club heavy duty aluminum foil to it. And what that does is it reflects the light back rather than, so the black surfaces, now there's a little bit of spectral distribution, but for the most part, you can assume about 90% of your light is going to absorb into dark, flat, not versus glossy, dark, flat surfaces. Whereas white surfaces, you can assume about 10% will. But if I use, the aluminum foil, the intent behind that was so I could reflect 90% of the light back. It was just a convenient way to do it, have really good reflectivity. And that way my plants could grow better. So what you could do is, if you use blue boards or, polystyrene white boards or the yellow polyiso, just layer it up, 1 inch layers so you can match the curvature, put on whatever surface finish you want, paint it white, paint it, put on the aluminum foil, whatever you want. You'll reflect the light back, put your IBCs, your intermediate bulk containers down at the base of that wall, paint those black. You'll have a very well insulated north side, and your ratio between your glazing surface and your growing surface will be very low, meaning you lose very little energy. You'll have good thermal mass in the IBCs, so you'll be able to, through convective heat transfer through the night, release a lot of energy. It's just a good solution. Any other, see 2 more chats. Let's grab those. If we ordered a container full of materials, how long in general would it take? Okay, so, if you ordered a full container, how long does it take to get there? This is how it would work. You would come up with a group of people, and you tell me what you want. You'd say, well, I want 7 greenhouses using this kit, the design, the Gothic high tunnel, and I just recommend that. You'd have to bend your hoops. I have a video. If you look at my YouTube channel, I do have a video showing how I bend my hoops. You could build something similar, and you could use whatever radius you want, but you can get I don't even know numerically what radius I used. I just kind of played till I found something I liked. You would have to bend your own hoops. I can't, obviously the metal's not up here. You'd have to build some mechanism to bend your own hoops. So you would get this load in. Now, how it would work, you would come up with a group of 7 people saying, hey, we all want 1,500 square foot greenhouses. I would say, okay, sure. This is how much steel you need. This is how many polycarbonate panels. I basically get you a bill of materials. I would contact, and this is how I would make money. I'm making money off of this, but let me tell you how. By bulk purchases or large volumes, I would receive a discount from the owner of the factory. So you'd be paying effectively, standard price. I would be getting a discount because of a larger volume. I'd get even a better price because of quantity. So it is a win-win. You're not really paying any more by doing it this way. So it's actually a good solution. But how it would work is I would negotiate the deal with the bill of materials through the company owner that does the polycarbonate, and through the partner affiliates there that I know, they would get the steel, the accessories, polycarbonate. They'd put it all into a cargo container. You'd have to, now this is where it gets scary. You'd have to do a wire transfer initially for 30% of the material price in China. So that'd be like $10,000. Little, it'd be like 7,500. When they've done your order, you'd have to pay for the other, let's say, whatever, 15,000. That's 2/3 of it, plus your shipping. I paid $22,000 last year for shipping. Now my shipping is 2,500. So it's gone down a lot. It was just insane last year. It cost me a fortune. So your total outlay that you're going to have to wire transfer to China is going to be on the order of 25, 27,000. Well, it'd be more than that. I know it's more than that. Because anyway, point is, let's say 30,000. Okay, ballpark. It will then have to go. You'll have to wait for a booking. That'll take 2 weeks. You will then have a 6 to 8 week journey to reach the port of Los Angeles. And then depending on union strikes, whatever else, they'll load the train. It'll get to the port of Salt Lake. I got stuck last year with some kind of customs inspection that took another week. That was kind of a bugger. And by the way, I had to pay $450 for the privilege of having Homeland Security inspect my cargo container. Be aware, there's all these funky costs. Okay, so it gets to Salt Lake. Oh yeah, and one other thing. In LA, you have to immediately respond within 24 hours to JTL Logistics to pay $150 for their paperwork fee. And it's only through Chase Bank. And they won't take a wire transfer. They won't do it via credit cards. And the only Chase Bank for me is in Idle Falls. So I had to drive all the way to Idle Falls to pay that. Then what happens? So it's in Port of Salt Lake. The Cargo Link, I use Cargo Link as my broker. They will charge 30.8% tariffs. You will need to, let's see. You'll need to pay that up front. I'm trying to think how it'll work for you guys. I have an account with them, so it's a little bit different. First 2 times, you'd have to pay them directly. And then you'll have to pay up front for them to ship. Now, the shipping cost from Salt Lake to the ranch, you're probably looking at $1,000. So let's add up the numbers. Okay, 8 weeks. You realistically, 10 weeks from the time you got a lead time 3 weeks. Realistically, 13 weeks from the time you order to the time you have delivered. So that's what it comes down to.